I've been a nurse for 6 years. The long shifts, the unpredictable patients, the quiet hum of a nearly empty hospital in the early hours of the morning. None of it was new to me. But something about that particular night shift at St. Augustine Medical Center still sends chills down my spine. It was supposed to be a routine shift. It wasn't. When I arrived for my shift, the hospital was quieter than usual, the kind of stillness that made the air feel heavier. The day staff was wrapping up, some looking exhausted, others eager to leave. The bright overhead lights cast long shadows along the polished floors, reflecting the tired faces of nurses finishing their shifts. I checked in with Janet, the charge nurse, who barely looked up from her computer as she handed me the patient list. "Should be an easy night," she said, rubbing her temples. "Just routine check-ins. Room 312 might need some extra pain management, but other than that, you're in the clear." I scanned the list quickly. The third floor, post-op recovery, had only a handful of patients. Most were stable, recovering from surgeries earlier in the day. A quick glance at the clock told me I had just under an hour before the first scheduled rounds. "No emergencies?" I asked, tucking the clipboard under my arm. "Not unless someone decides to surprise us," Janet muttered, already halfway out the door. I let out a small sigh of relief. A quiet shift was what I needed. I should have known better. Around 11:45 p.m., I was making rounds, checking vitals, and ensuring post-op patients were comfortable. Everything was normal, until I got to room 316. The door was slightly open, the light dimmed. The bed was empty. At first, I assumed the patient had gone to the restroom, but the bathroom door was open and the room was empty. I checked my chart. The patient, Mr. David Lorman, was a post-op cardiac patient, a 57-year-old man recovering from valve replacement surgery. He wasn't supposed to be mobile yet. "Mr. Lorman?" I called softly, stepping inside. Silence. A strange feeling crept over me. Patients sometimes wandered, confused from medication, but I just checked on him 30 minutes ago, and he had been resting. I stepped out into the hallway, scanning in both directions. No one. I was about to alert security when I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the far end of the hallway. I turned, expecting to see another nurse, but it wasn't a nurse. A man was standing at the end of the dimly lit hallway, just past the nurses' station. He wasn't wearing a hospital gown, he wasn't wearing scrubs, he was in dark jeans, a black hoodie, and he was barefoot. He was staring at me. My heart began to race. "Sir, are you lost?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain calm. No response. I took a cautious step forward. The air felt wrong. "Sir, this is a restricted area," I said again. "Are you a family member? Visiting hours are over." Still, no response. Then, he turned and walked away. I should have let him go. I should have called security, but something about the way he moved, the way he knew exactly where he was going, sent a shiver through me. I followed. I trailed behind him at a safe distance as he took a left turn toward the old wing of the hospital. The old wing had been closed for over a year, set for renovation, but budget cuts kept delaying the project. Only a few storage rooms and maintenance areas remained accessible. The hallway was poorly lit, the air colder, and that's when I saw it. The basement access door was slightly ajar. The man had disappeared. I hesitated, debating whether to go back for security. But before I could move, a noise echoed up from the basement. A faint shuffle, a low groan. Someone was down there. I know what you're thinking. I should have gone back. I should have called for backup. But something in me, some awful, reckless curiosity, made me step forward. I pushed the door open wider, peering down the stairwell. The light flickered at the bottom. I took a deep breath and started descending, my grip tightening on the railing. The air was damp, stale, filled with the scent of old cleaning chemicals and something else, something metallic. I reached the bottom and turned the corner into the hallway, and that's when I saw it. A hospital bed, pushed against the wall, and someone laying in it. I hesitated, staring at the figure in the bed. The sheets were drawn up to their chest, an old, discolored blanket partially covering their face. "Sir?" I whispered. No response. I reached for the clipboard hanging at the end of the bed, expecting to find a patient chart. There was none. I pulled the blanket down slightly, just enough to see his face. My stomach dropped. It was Mr. Lorman. His eyes were wide open, unseeing. His mouth hung slightly ajar. I fumbled for his wrist, pressing my fingers against his skin, cold, no pulse. My mind raced. How had he gotten here? Who brought him? And then behind me, a footstep. I turned so fast I nearly tripped. My flashlight beam landed on a second bed, partially hidden in the shadows. Someone was sitting on it, not moving, watching. I bolted. I ran back up the stairs, my breath coming in short gasps. As I burst through the door, I slammed it shut behind me and locked it. I didn't stop running until I reached the security station. Security swept the basement. They found nothing. No bodies, no beds, no signs that anyone had been there at all. But Mr. Lorman, he was officially listed as a missing patient. He was never found. To this day, I don't know who or what I saw that night, and I don't want to find out. I never thought much about working the night shift. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. As a 28-year-old woman living alone in a small town in Wisconsin, I didn't have the luxury of being picky. I worked as the overnight receptionist at a small roadside motel, the kind of place where weary travelers stopped for a quick rest before continuing their journeys. The motel itself was old, a relic from the 1980s, with flickering neon signs that barely lit up the parking lot. The lobby was small, with a wooden front desk, outdated carpet that smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, and a vending machine in the corner that hummed loudly in the silence. My workspace was simple: a computer to check in guests, a phone that rarely rang, and a security monitor with grainy black and white footage of the parking lot and hallways. Most nights were quiet. I spent hours scrolling through my phone, wiping down the already clean desk, and organizing the key cards that no one ever seemed to return properly. The guests that did check in at that hour were usually truckers too exhausted to drive any further, couples sneaking away for the night, or the occasional drifter who paid in cash and asked too many questions. The worst I usually dealt with was the occasional drunk who forgot their room number, or a guest who complained about the flickering light in their bathroom. But that night was different. That night, I realized just how vulnerable I really was. Most nights were uneventful. I spent hours scrolling through my phone, wiping down counters, and restocking shelves. The worst I usually dealt with was the occasional creepy guy who lingered too long. But that night was different. That night I realized just how vulnerable I really was. It started with the van. A rusted white cargo van pulled into the lot and parked at the far end, just outside the reach of the security cameras. The headlights flickered off, leaving only the dull glow of the motel's neon sign reflecting off the cracked windshield. That alone was enough to set me on edge. No one got out. No one came inside. For 10 minutes, it just sat there, engine idling. I kept glancing at the security monitor, trying to get a better look, but the grainy footage showed only shadows moving within the van's dark interior. The tinted windows concealed whoever was inside, making it impossible to see if I was being paranoid or if someone was actually watching me. I shifted in my chair, trying to focus on something else, but my gaze kept drifting back to the screen. The longer the van sat there, the more uncomfortable I became. I told myself it was nothing, just someone stopping for a break. Maybe a long-haul trucker catching some rest before heading back on the road. But something about the way the van just sat there, unmoving, sent a ripple of unease through me. Then, without warning, the engine turned off. The bell above the door jingled, and I looked up to see a man walk in. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up. He didn't make eye contact as he walked to the back of the store, slowly browsing the shelves. I felt my stomach tighten. It wasn't that he looked dangerous. There was nothing overtly threatening about him. But something was off. The way he moved, the way he kept his face angled away from the security cameras. I glanced at the monitor behind the counter. The van was still there. I swallowed hard and forced myself to act normal. "Hey there, need any help finding something?" He didn't answer. He just kept browsing. Then, after a long pause, he grabbed a single bottle of water and walked up to the counter. He placed it down without a word. I rang him up, my hands suddenly clammy. "That'll be $1.25. He slid a crumpled bill across the counter. I took it, but as I reached for the register, I saw his hands, scarred knuckles, dirt under his fingernails, a thin, jagged cut along his wrist. Something told me he wasn't just a random customer. I handed him his change, and he finally met my eyes. There was no warmth in them, just a quiet, unsettling intensity. Then, without a word, he turned and left. I kept an eye on the van. The man from earlier had walked straight toward it, but he didn't get in. Instead, he just stood outside, leaning against the side, staring at the gas pumps. And then another man got out. This one was shorter, stockier, wearing a flannel jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He stretched, rolled his shoulders, then turned toward the store. I felt my pulse quicken. He walked in more confidently than the first guy, heading straight to the cooler. He grabbed a six-pack of beer, then made his way to the counter. "You working alone tonight?" he asked casually, placing the beer down. I forced a tight smile. "Just until morning." He nodded slowly, his gaze flicking to the empty parking lot outside. "Quiet night, huh?" "Yeah." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's good. Less distractions." A chill ran through me. I rang him up as quickly as I could. He paid in cash, then lingered for a second too long before finally turning and walking out. I let out a shaky breath. The two men stood outside, talking. Then slowly, they both turned and looked directly at me. I locked the door. For the next hour, nothing happened. The van was still there, but no one else came inside. I kept telling myself I was overreacting. And then I heard it. A faint rustling noise from the back of the store. My stomach clenched. There was a back entrance, but it was locked, at least supposed to be. I crept toward the stockroom, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. The fluorescent light buzzed above me as I reached the door leading to the back alley. It was open, just an inch, just enough for someone to slip inside. I backed away slowly, heart hammering. I dialed 911 with shaking hands. Then I heard the sound of a footstep inside the stockroom. I ran. I bolted for the front, just as something heavy slammed against the stockroom door behind me. I barely managed to grab the store keys and unlock the front entrance before I heard it. The sound of someone running after me. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I just ran as fast as I could across the parking lot toward the main road. Headlights appeared in the distance, a car approaching. I sprinted toward it, waving my arms frantically. The car slowed, and then the driver's side door opened. It was a police officer. I collapsed against the car, gasping, pointing back at the store. "There's someone inside." The officer's face hardened. He radioed for backup, then drew his gun and moved toward the building. Minutes later, another patrol car arrived. They searched the store, the alley, the surrounding area, but the men were gone. The van had disappeared. The only thing they found was the back door, still swinging open, and a boot print on the floor behind the counter. I never worked the night shift again. The police never found them. No fingerprints, no security footage clear enough to identify them. Just my memory of their faces, burned into my mind. I still think about that night. About how close I came to something far worse. About what would have happened if I hadn't run. It wasn't a bad job. Boring, sure, but not bad. I worked security at a mid-sized office building on the outskirts of the city, a job I had taken for the quiet. It was just me, a desk, a few monitors showing grainy security footage, and the occasional late-night employee burning the midnight oil. Most of the time, the building was dead silent after 10 p.m. The kind of silence that presses in, that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound, every hum of the air vents, every creak of the old pipes, every flicker of the fluorescent lights above me. I was used to it, until one night, when I wasn't alone. The shift started like any other. The evening cleaning crew had left by 9:30, and the last of the accountants finished up a little after 9:45. By 10 p.m., the building was empty. Or at least, it should have been. I made my usual rounds, walking the hallways of the first and second floors, checking doors, making sure everything was locked up tight. The company I worked for had security cameras covering most areas, but they weren't perfect. Blind spots existed in stairwells, behind certain storage rooms, and along a few of the hallways leading to the underground parking garage. I was on my way back to the security office when I heard it. A soft noise, barely more than a whisper of movement. It came from the end of the hallway, near the break room. I froze, listening. Nothing. Maybe it was the air conditioning kicking on. Maybe I was just tired. Shaking off the nerves, I walked back to my office, locking the door behind me. The monitors showed empty hallways, the darkened glass doors of the lobby, the deserted parking lot. Nothing. I had settled into the usual monotony, half watching the screens while scrolling through my phone, when one of the monitors flickered. The elevator was moving, my stomach twisted. No one else was supposed to be in the building. I straightened, watching as the numbers on the panel changed. It was coming from the basement parking garage. Slowly, it made its way up. Ding. 3rd floor. The doors slid open. I switched the camera feed to that floor, expecting to see nothing. But there was someone there, a figure, just barely visible at the edge of the frame, standing still, too still. A chill crept up my spine. The camera angle didn't give me a full view, and the figure wasn't moving. I switched to the next camera down the hallway, but by the time it loaded, they were gone. I told myself it was a glitch. The cameras were old, and they glitched all the time. Still, I couldn't shake the unease curling in my stomach. I grabbed my flashlight and left the office, making my way toward the stairwell. I didn't want to take the elevator. I had seen too many horror movies to make that mistake. The 3rd floor was dimly lit, rows of empty cubicles stretching into the distance. The only sound was the faint hum of the air vents. I walked slowly, checking each aisle, glancing behind every partition. Nothing. Then, from the other end of the floor, a soft scuff of a shoe against tile. I snapped my head toward the sound, heart hammering. Someone was there. I took a step forward, shining my flashlight into the darkness. Nothing. No movement. No sound. The unease in my gut grew. I turned around, ready to head back to the office. And that's when I saw it. One of the cubicle chairs. It had moved. I rushed back downstairs, locking myself in the security office. My hands were shaking as I pulled up the cameras again, flipping through every feed as fast as I could. Nothing. Nothing in the halls, nothing in the stairwell, nothing in the basement parking lot. I exhaled, trying to slow my breathing. Maybe I had imagined the sound. Maybe the chair had been moved earlier, and I just hadn't noticed. And then, just as I was beginning to calm down, the handle on the office door moved. A slow, deliberate turn. I stopped breathing. The door was locked. Whoever was on the other side couldn't get in. But they tried. A second, more forceful attempt at the handle. I grabbed the desk phone, my fingers clumsy as I dialed 911. The operator answered just as there was a final frustrated rattle of the doorknob, then silence. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone in the building, I whispered. I'm security. I'm supposed to be alone. I gave my address, my name, my position. The operator assured me officers were on their way. And then, right before I hung up, the cameras flickered. One by one, the feeds went dark. I couldn't stay in that office. I grabbed the flashlight and crept toward the back exit. The emergency door was heavy, old, and it let out a loud metallic creak as I pushed it open. The second I stepped outside, I felt the cold night air wrap around me. I ran. I sprinted toward the parking lot, breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. The distant wail of sirens filled the air, and I stumbled toward the street, waving my arms. A patrol car screeched to a stop, and 2 officers jumped out. I barely managed to choke out, "There's someone inside." They didn't hesitate. Guns drawn, they entered the building, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. I stood there, shaking, waiting for them to return. Minutes passed. Then one of the officers stepped back out. "We cleared the building," he said. "Nobody's there." I stared at him, my body still trembling. But I saw. There's no sign of forced entry. Nothing on the cameras either. That's when I noticed the second officer holding something in his gloved hand. A T-card. One that only employees were supposed to have. The police never found anyone, never figured out how they had gotten in, or how they had disappeared without a trace. But I knew. I knew someone had been in that building with me. And sometimes late at night, I still wonder if they're watching, waiting for another chance. I never thought working the night shift would change my life forever. It was supposed to be temporary, a way to pay off some bills while I figured things out. The hours were brutal, the loneliness palpable, but the pay was decent. I worked at a 24-hour gas station off the highway. The kind of place truckers and late-night wanderers stopped at for coffee, cigarettes, and questionable convenience store sandwiches. For the first few months, nothing happened beyond the usual weirdos. Drunk college kids, sketchy loners who barely spoke, and exhausted truckers stopping for caffeine. But that all changed one night. The store was empty, save for me and the dull hum of the fluorescent lights. I was scrolling through my phone when the automatic doors slid open with a faint whoosh. A man walked in, wearing a dark hoodie, his hands shoved deep into the front pocket. Something about him made me uneasy. He kept his head down as he moved through the aisles, picking up a few random items: gum, a can of soda, a pack of peanuts. I tried to shake off the creeping feeling in my gut. He was just another night owl, nothing unusual. But then he came to the counter. He placed the items down without a word. When I rang them up, he finally spoke, low, almost a whisper. "You work alone?" I hesitated. It wasn't an unusual question, but something about the way he asked it felt off. "Yeah," I said cautiously, "just me until morning." He nodded slowly, his gaze never meeting mine. Then he paid in cash, grabbed his stuff, and walked out into the night. But he didn't leave. I watched through the glass as he stood near the gas pumps, staring at the building, unmoving. Then, after a long moment, he walked into the shadows and disappeared. I told myself I was being paranoid, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Not long after, a white van pulled into the lot. It parked by the edge of the property, just outside the range of the security cameras. No one got out. I tried not to stare, but my skin prickled with unease. The van sat there, engine idling, its headlights off. I told myself it was just someone taking a break, maybe a tired driver needing a nap. But the longer it sat there, the more unsettled I became. Finally, I stepped outside, pretending to take a smoke break. The night air was crisp, the distant hum of the highway the only sound. The van's windows were tinted, impossible to see through. I took a few slow steps toward it, my heart hammering in my chest. That's when the van's engine revved, and it peeled out of the lot, disappearing into the night. I stood there, shaken, before going back inside and locking the doors. I was counting down the minutes until my shift ended when I heard it. A soft thud from the back of the store. I froze. The back entrance was locked. I checked it myself earlier. I grabbed the baseball bat we kept under the counter and moved cautiously toward the stockroom. The fluorescent lights flickered as I crept closer. The door to the back alley was still shut, the lock intact. But something felt wrong. Then I saw it. The security camera monitor. The screen that showed the back alley feed had gone black. A cold wave of fear washed over me. Someone was out there. Someone who knew where the cameras were. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and dialed 911. As the line rang, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The soft, deliberate sound of someone trying the doorknob. The operator picked up, and I whispered, "Someone is trying to break in. I'm alone. Please send someone." The operator's voice was calm, reassuring, but my heart was racing too fast to process her words. I gripped the bat tighter, backing away from the door. Then, a loud bang. The door shuddered as if someone had thrown their weight against it. I bolted, running back to the front of the store. My hands were slick with sweat as I grabbed the keys and locked the front entrance. And then I saw it. A shadow moving past the windows. Someone was circling the store. I crouched behind the counter, my breath shallow, listening. The minutes stretched into eternity. Then, sirens. Red and blue lights flashed outside. A police car skidded into the lot, and I felt a wave of relief so intense I almost collapsed. A few seconds later, the sound of running footsteps disappeared into the darkness. The cops found nothing. Whoever it was had vanished before they could be caught. But they had been there. They had been watching me. I quit the job the next day. The cops said it was likely an attempted robbery, that I had scared them off by calling 911. But I knew better. That man in the hoodie, the white van, the camera feed cutting out. It wasn't random. They were planning something, and I had been their target.